All right, well, welcome to our event called Innovations for Students with Special Needs. Thank you for those of you who are here, and thank you to those who will be watching online. Today we're going to celebrate the diversity of students, especially those with special needs, unique challenges, and a range of abilities. At Sutherland, we believe that every student should be viewed as an individual with unique characteristics, but we also recognize that there are those who have additional challenges in learning, education, and launching into a career. And it's for those students that we have this conversation tonight, to honor their remarkable potential and to ask the state of Utah to do even more for them. As some of you know, last year the nation had to take a hard look at what we're doing for students with special needs in the Supreme Court case Andrew F. v. Douglas. We learned that we have to offer more than just a minimum benefit for students, and that we have to offer an education that matches their needs. So all of us tonight should be asking what ideas can improve our district public schools. And many of you know that Utah offers the Carson Smith Scholarship, which allows students with special needs to access private schools. And now people are saying, why can't we do more? What other options are there? Can we spend state dollars on a range of tutoring, therapies, or online courses? So tonight we're here to hear from some experts on each of these topics. They're doing critical work for these students, for young students, for those who are launching into their careers. And so I hope we can all walk away with new ideas to help our students in our homes and in our schools. So I'll go over the introductions for these panelists. First, we have Leah Lobato. She's the director of the Governor's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities and Business Relations, and this is the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation. Long title, but we made it through. Brittany Flint, founder and president of Gigi's Playhouse, a Down Syndrome Achievement Center. We have Liz Longhurst, a licensed therapeutic creation specialist at the National Ability Center in Park City. Tricia Nelson, president and director of Utah Autism Academy. And Christine Hansen, a reading tutor at the Dyslexia Center of Utah. And you can find their full bios on your seat. And so a little housekeeping, we'll have each of them go through and kind of explain their organization, their school, their innovation, and then we'll open it up to questions with the audience. So let's start with Leah.
Great, thank you. So the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation has long served students with disabilities in helping them to connect to employment and restoration services to help with that. With the new legislation, WIOA, or Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, there's a piece of that that says that we need to better serve youth with disabilities. So we're doing a lot of innovative things to make sure that we're connecting youth with disabilities with opportunities to meet with businesses and to improve their skills in connecting to employment. So we do work readiness trainings and other things connecting with school districts. In my position, I work directly with business partners. So with business partners, I'm meeting with them regularly to talk about how to recruit, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities. And the piece that our business relations team and our governor's committee can bring to what we're doing for youth is our transition mentoring events. So we do events every January to April where youth with disabilities can connect to business partners in the community that are members of our People with Disabilities Network or our Utah Business Leadership Network. And the youth get an opportunity to go meet with the business members, the people who work at the company, get a tour of the business, do some activities with the business members, and then network and meet for a mentoring lunch. So that's the event that we've been doing and improving on in the last few years. So this year we'll have 7 total events in our transition mentoring events.
Thank you. We'll go to Brittany.
So I am Brittany Flint, and I am the founder and president currently of Gigi's Playhouse, which is a Down Syndrome Achievement Center that's located in Layton, Utah. We offer all of our programs completely free to our families and the individual with Down syndrome. We are 98% volunteer ran and 100% donation and sponsors. We offer 30 therapeutic programs to them and their families that help them from a mom that gets an in utero diagnosis all the way through the end of life for an individual. So currently we have a baby that's 3 weeks old that has attended, and then our oldest right now is 49. Those programs are made so that they can start at a young age and be able to live independently, go to college, get a job, and then we also have lots of older programs that allow those individuals to come without a caregiver. So we have reading literacy, which helps them in school, cooking that's going to help them as they get older, math tutoring. All of those programs are going to help them through school as well as post-high school.
Great. Thank you. We'll go to Liz.
Thanks. The National Ability Center, our mission is to empower individuals of all abilities, so individuals with and without disabilities, by building self-esteem, confidence, and lifelong skills through sports, recreation, and educational opportunities. So what that means is we do a lot. We have primarily recreational activities such as rock walls or horseback riding, or even in Moab, taking individuals whitewater rafting and involving families and friends, because a disability doesn't happen to a person, it happens to a family or a community, and we are so lucky to have that difference in our world. So we also work with school systems to provide physical education, since Utah does not require that as part of the core curriculum. So for all ages, so we are partnering with schools that do not provide physical education to encourage individuals to move throughout the lifespan and improve educational scores.
Great. Tricia.
My name is Tricia Nelson. I'm the president and director of Utah Autism Academy. Our program is an intensive day treatment center focusing on evidence-based practices for individuals on the spectrum from ages 2 to 22. We focus primarily on using the child's motivation in order to help them learn skills. And with that motivation, we're able to have a lot of fun with these kids so that they can be learning while they're having a good time. And we also focus on interventions that are appropriate for managing behaviors, where we're meeting the children where they're at and focusing on antecedent measures, or what happens before the behavior, to make sure that we're giving them the best chance for success. And then not using reactionary measures in terms of behavior reduction. So it's important for us that we use the treatments that are evidence-based to be able to provide appropriate treatment so that we can get the kids back into a mainstream, more public school environment so that they can be successful there. We also collaborate with public education in order to help their staff better understand how to decrease problem behaviors and increase skill acquisition and coping skills so that they can better be included with their peers. It's our goal really to include individuals on the spectrum at whatever level of severity in their community and in their schools with their peers, because we feel that they can be a contributor to society in a variety of ways.
Thank you. Christine.
I'm Christine Hansen. I am, a reading tutor at the Dyslexia Center of Utah. And what we have done at the Dyslexia Center is our director, Shelley Hatch, has intense training that she's done over many years to help dyslexic students. And what she's been able to do is to really consolidate a lot of that training and find tutors, people like me that are interested in helping these students, and provide a training protocol that helps us and really enables us to teach these students. Approximately 20% of any student in our community is dealing, with some form of dyslexia. And we have and the schools are just not, these are the students that often fall through the cracks. They they're absolutely intelligent. It's not a matter of how smart they are. It's not a matter of their ability. It is a neurobiological issue that they have. Dyslexic children turn into dyslexic adults. This is not something that they outgrow, and it's not something that really can be changed. However, they are very, very capable, and we have a way that we teach the children based on an evidence-based program that we can really individualize these lessons that they need. Dyslexic students need a lot of one-on-one attention, not because they're less intelligent, often because they are more intelligent, and they have learned so many coping mechanisms to slide by in school, or they get put with students that are not at their same intellectual level. It's a very big challenge. It's a very big challenge for them. They lose their motivation. So what our job is to help them regain that love of learning and feel confident in their abilities. They may not read the very same way, they may not learn to read the same way as 80% of their peers do, but they still can learn to read. They can still experience literature. They have so much to give. it is a net good for us to help these students, because we're not just losing 20% of their abilities, we're losing far more because they have so much to give. And if they lose that at a young age, it's incredibly difficult to get it back. At the Dyslexia Center, we want to, it can be very expensive to do customized individual plans for each student you can imagine. We use Orton-Gillingham Approach that requires a lot of time for preparation for each lesson. Our director has been able to create lesson plans in a specific scope and sequence that allow us to move forward with the tools that we need and individualize the lessons and tailor them. We have the pattern in place, and what we do is we can take each student and tailor a pattern that's already created to fit them exactly through all of their senses.
Great. Thank you. That was a good first round and kind of a sampling of the expertise here. So I'm actually going to ask the first question, and we'll start with Brittany this time and kind of loop around. All of you work with different communities, you have different missions, but the one thing we know is that there's a great need for these different services that you provide. What are the major roadblocks, whether it's policy, law, coordination with school districts, awareness? What is it that you run into to stop kind of getting this work out there for students?
So the thing that we have found that we run into is it's just helping the community understand that an individual with Down syndrome is still an individual first. And it's really hard to see past a diagnosis that they wear on their face. That has kind of hindered us in finding community partners to hire these individuals after they've been through training. The schools, we fight a lot for inclusion, and that is extremely hard just because of they wear the diagnosis on their face. So the other thing that has been really interesting to us in the last 3 years that we've run into is the older the individual is with Down syndrome, one of the biggest roadblocks we have is their parent, just because they have got into probably a routine, more or less, and we just have to help them understand that their child's still very capable of doing things no matter how old they are.
Great. Thank you. Liz?
I would agree that sometimes the public perception is something that we struggle a little bit with. Also understanding the scope of different abilities and assuming competence before you assume other things. So looking at an individual who might be different than myself and not really knowing all that they can do, and so our knee-jerk reaction is to assume that they can't do instead of that they can, and so looking at their abilities. Beyond that, I think specifically with education and our access is some of the red tape that I'm sure that we can talk about a little bit later, but some of the red tape for us as a nonprofit to come and support in the schools, because there are so many things that a school, whether it's a private, charter, or a public school, they need to go through. They have to focus on certain aspects before they can allow someone else to come in with their own ideas or their own curriculum to help educate their students, because they need to cover all of these other things, and that can be a little bit difficult when trying to plan time.
Thank you. Tricia?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Andrew Douglas case earlier. Like, it's interesting that one of our biggest barriers is we serve as a day treatment center, we serve as like a middle ground for maybe schools who can't serve individuals on the spectrum with more severe needs and hospitalization. So we are this place where we can really get their skills to a level where you feel like they can have appropriate inclusion in a public school setting. But getting the support from the school that we need to appropriately transition has been a challenge for us. It's important that we, like I mentioned earlier, that we hit things before they happen, that we put things into place to support a student before we actually see these behaviors that can be so really debilitating for the whole team to feel like that they're having to deal with some of these things. But unlike what Brittany said earlier, our clients don't wear their diagnosis on their face, and it is considered an invisible disability until you see some of these challenging behaviors. So awareness of appropriate inclusion and the support that we need from the education system as we transition these kids into appropriate situations in school systems has been a challenge for us.
Thank you. Christine.
I'm just so impressed with these women and what they're doing and how true it rings even for this population of dyslexic students. That idea of an invisible challenge. It's not just invisible with dyslexia, it's very common. If you look at a classroom of 30 students, 5 of those students are struggling with some form of dyslexia. And what happens a lot of times is that the schools are not equipped to deal with that 20%. So a lot of what we run into, and also the schools are often reluctant to make any kind of diagnosis. They really can't make a diagnosis. It's very expensive to have a diagnosis done. And if there's any talk of the dyslexia, then the school is on the hook to pay for that diagnosis. Very reluctant to do that, and it's a challenge. You can imagine if 20% of your students are struggling, 80% of your students are probably doing pretty well. But these students need a different type of instruction. It's not a matter of telling them to work harder. It's not a matter of telling them to pay attention differently. It's not a matter of changing their glasses. There's no medication that can help this, but there are evidence-based, very strong protocols that will help these students, that can help them learn in a way that is most important to them. Again, the problem usually comes down to money. It is a challenge to individualize the instruction for one student in a classroom, much less 5. And they really need that individualized, customized, tailored program for them, which can be, it's worth everything, and it can cost thousands of dollars. Really, at the Dyslexia Center, what we've been able to do is to create that program, and but we really have to work outside of the schools. And it's not just public schools. We have students, I currently have 15 students, and less than half are in the public schools. These are students from well-to-do communities, in private schools and in charter schools with very involved parents. But the schools are not able to help them. And as hard as we try, and with Shelley's dream of having all of these centers, we've gone from her working in her home with 17 students to now we have 6 centers around Utah and 180 students. But again, even though we try very hard, we're a nonprofit, we keep our costs down as much as we can, there is never enough money for scholarships. And we have this drive to help as many students as we can, but it's still unaffordable for a lot of families. And if they don't have the ability to pay for it and we can't get the scholarship money for them, it's just not there. There's no way to pay for it. So it's a challenge to work with the schools, and we don't want to step on their toes. Those teachers, they're doing amazing things, and they work so hard with so many of their students. But we do have this silent, significant minority of students that can achieve and can do things. And there are more choices for them than falling through the cracks. There's more choices than they're so smart. They have learned how to get through in so many ways in school, how to memorize, how to do things to take the focus off of their reading. Sometimes they act out in class because if they're acting silly, then no one's going to recognize that they can't read. And they need more intervention that the schools at this time don't have the money for, and a lot of the families don't have the money for. What we really want is to be able to have the opportunity to help as many students as we can through perhaps getting more state money that they can take to tutoring centers and take some of the stress off the schools, but it still needs to be covered somewhere, somehow.
Thank you. Perfect. Leah.
So some of the struggles that we face in the work that we're doing is, I've worked with business partners since 2003, and there are laws out there, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that advocate for individuals with disabilities to be able to access employment in their community. And we're 28 years from the passing of the ADA, and we still have an incredibly high unemployment rate for people with disabilities. So even though we've had 28 years of this legislation, we still have businesses that don't understand how to recruit, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities. My team's an incredibly small team. It's myself, one other colleague who does business training and resource and support, and then we partner with the Department of Workforce Services Choose to Work specialists and our vocational rehabilitation Choose to Work specialists to reach out to business partners. So getting businesses educated is one of the biggest struggles that we have. Once we have a business on board and they see the true ability of people, they're partners for life. So when I reach out to businesses, I let them know that I don't offend easily. I want them to ask me the tough questions they have about disability and employment, because if I can answer their questions, I can take away the fear and the stigma that comes around hiring a person with a disability is going to be more complicated. Really, we're looking at how do we get youth connected to employment more rapidly, because we know that youth have opportunities for paid work experiences before they graduate from high school, have better success once they do exit high school. We don't want people falling off the cliff. You know, you get all these services in school, and as soon as you exit school, you lose all of these services, and if you don't have a network for employment, it can be really difficult to transition off of benefits and to be independent.
Thank you. And we'll open it up to the audience in just one moment. Actually, did anyone else want to circle back? If not, I'm going to ask Liz to talk a little bit more about the red tape that she runs into. Just kind of delve a little bit into that, highlight some of those issues for us.
I did have actually one thing to add.
Oh, yeah, please.
It's agreement with what Leah is saying, that supporting our businesses to hire individuals with disabilities with some of the initiatives that the National Ability Center has for individuals in transition, so 16 to 22 or more, it is very difficult to help them see that they need to assume competence, as I was saying earlier, that an individual who has a visual impairment, the most common one I have heard is an individual with a visual impairment is not going to cut themselves if they wash the dishes or other things like that. And that's just a fear for not wanting someone else to be hurt in their kitchen or things like that. And so something that simple is easily fixed. So the red tape, typically as I talk to educators in general, they want the help. They want somebody to come in and say, these are some strategies that may work for your students, that a simple switch up of a location in a room, it could be the lighting, or it could be where they're sitting or who they're sitting next to, could be that antecedent to a behavior that all we need to do is take a look at what's going on in the classroom. But getting me to come into that classroom or allowing me to come into that classroom can be pretty difficult, whether it's parents or time or because they don't want to potentially throw something off within the class. So that is one thing. When I talk about doing inclusive programming, because a lot of schools don't have physical education in their curriculum, offering for us to come to them, bring all of the equipment that would be needed, all of the instructors that would be needed. Just finding that time sometimes is the most challenging part, but then also getting the different administrators or different things within the school allowed for us to come in is very difficult. It can be. So getting the number one thing, having been a physical educator in a Utah school, if your administration is on your side, you can have the most amazing program. If your administration doesn't see your vision for a program, it can be very, very difficult, and that is being just very blunt about it.
Thank you. Thank you for that response.
Can I add something?
Please.
I love that point about assuming competence. I think that's something that we all have in common, that these students have so many abilities and so much competence. Sometimes they get lost in the shuffle, but if we can really harness that, and if we could free up some of the red tape and some of the money, perhaps, just to help, we would gain so much more than we would ever spend to do that. These are amazing individuals. And if we go in and assuming, for example, in my field with reading, if a student gets labeled as a low reader, that follows them through the rest of their schooling and often through the rest of their life. If a third grader is not reading at grade level, chances are very slim that they will ever catch up. And then we lose everything that they had to offer, not just because they're not performing, but because they're shuffled into lower expectations. We stop assuming that they are competent and start looking for all the ways that they are not. And then we lose that wonderful resource that we have in these students.
Thank you. Helpful perspective. So we'll open it up to the audience. Does anyone have a question?
So I have a question for you guys. I know a lot of you have talked about evidence-based programs that you follow to help your students, and I'm kind of curious where that evidence comes from, and do you guys do any first-hand research and implementing new programs for the students, or does that all just come from other places and then just implement them?
Great question. Who wants to start?
I will.
Yeah, Brittany, please.
So we are actually part of a national organization. So we have teams at corporate that are for our evidence-based. We have SLPs that are there, physical therapists, as well as special ed teachers that they really have gone through and taken for our literacy program some of these other programs that have been proven to work for individuals with Down syndrome, and taken some of those things from all of them to create the program that we have. And then we've really followed that through metrics to be able to see that it's working with our community and our individuals. And then a lot of our other programs that are done through purposeful play and things like that they're all created again by physical therapists, or our speech program is done by a speech pathologist as well. And then we do follow that through with all our metrics.
Thank you.
So we use a method called applied behavior analysis. It's been proven since the 1960s as an evidence-based model, and all of our clinicians are certified through the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. So the way that we do treatment is based on the data that's collected. So we're able to run programming and collect data on the things that we're doing, and really the analytics is the part that is the most fun, because we can tell if it's really working. So as we do our treatment, the data is the most important part of what we do, because we can see exactly what's working and what's not working, and that makes effective intervention for us, is really analyzing that data appropriately and putting strategies into place that have been proven over time through research papers and things like that. But we are able to be creative with the way that we run programming, because we take data and prove that it's working.
I can speak to this as well.
Yeah.
So at the Dyslexia Center, we use everything that we do is based on an Orton-Gillingham methodology, which is not necessarily methodology or a technique, more of an approach to learning. The nice thing that we've been able to do at DCU is our director has a lot of extended training in this. It takes years. You can do it in postgraduate work. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of dedication to get that training. And yet we have 20% of students needing individualized training. It would be very difficult to find enough teachers that had that extended postgraduate training. We've been able to utilize Shelley's training and find a lot of programs and work them into a standardized scope and sequence that we can use. So we do have a standardized approach that we use with each student, but because we're tutoring one-on-one, we are able to customize that and help them each individually. So we're not doing long-term research projects, but I consider every day a research with my student. I'm researching what senses they need to use. I'm researching what this particular student needs. I myself don't have an advanced degree, but I have been trained by someone who does, And I have that ability day after day to reach these students. It's a fine line to walk. Because of vast numbers of dyslexic students, we have a great need for tutors. And the expense of training that many tutors is really going to be out of reach. We could use a dyslexia specialist in every school in the state. And that's difficult to find. That's difficult to get that kind of training. But we can take the evidence, we can take the programs that have been effective, we can observe them, we can meld them together, and then we can one-on-one look at those students and say, is this working for them? And then we can measure that based on their abilities and on the speed that they can work. Our mantra is often, we go as fast as we can and as slow as we must. It's hard to do that if you have a large group of students. But if you have a one-on-one or a very small group, maybe 2 students, you can do that much more easily.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to this on the panel? Okay, we have another question right here.
I have a question. A lot of this is great information. How, and the policymakers, I've heard, we need additional funding, additional resources for teachers. How do you guys work with your legislators, or is there a specific advocacy group that lobbies, your legislators and gives them this information? So that's my first question. And the second one, this is a pretty specific niche area of education, and I'm curious how all of you decided that you wanted to make this your career.
Okay, good question. So first one, how do you communicate with the legislature and advocate, and then how did you get involved? So let's start with Tricia.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I am the vice president of the Utah Autism Coalition. It's a coalition, grassroots coalition of families mostly who are really interested in changing policy here up at the Capitol. And what we've really focused on for the last several years is getting insurance legislation passed to include autism therapies in insurance policies. And we were successful at doing that a couple of years ago, and it was a pilot bill that just became law just barely. So we're very excited about that. And that is important to us because we feel like when we have, it's a medical treatment model, applied behavior analysis is that medical treatment model, and if we can implement that in the education system and get that insurance funding, then it's much more accessible than just going through the general education funding. So that was important to me, but also continual advocacy through legislation that includes more funding for our public school system so that we can more appropriately address the needs of these kids. And I got involved in this because my son was diagnosed with autism. So as soon as he was diagnosed with autism, I dove in, all in to learning about what we could do to better increase the services and also the awareness and the community involvement for these kids. And he's 16 now, and he still has a lot of struggles. But at the same time, it's very rewarding to see the changes that have been made over the last 16 years.
Thank you. Christine.
We have been able to work with Senator Mike Kennedy trying to get some have some influence in the state legislature, looking to free up some funding for scholarships specifically. So what we have done is gone directly to some of those committees and explained what we need and what we offer, looking to help some of the students that don't have the funds at home to take care of this. For myself, I have spent the majority of my career as a mother. I have 5 children, and I am a passionate lover of literature of all kinds, especially children's literature. And some of my greatest joy in my personal life has been watching that literacy light go on in my own children. And as years have gone by, and I've had different opportunities to teach, I went back to work in the public schools, and I became a paraprofessional. And I was working with first graders that were struggling with reading, that were below level. And I loved them. I loved what I did. I loved those students, and I worked so hard to try and get them to use different skills, and took the instructions that I had been given through the district, which had a lot of great ideas, a lot of great information. And I just was not seeing the progress in these students. And I had a hard time understanding it because they were bright, they were charming, they were eloquent, they were fun, they didn't have other behavioral issues, and yet they just could not learn to read. And even as young as first grade, some of them were going back to their classrooms and getting that idea that they weren't as smart as other kids and that there was something wrong with them. A lot of times in first grade or even second grade, you don't find that as much because the kids are all still really inclusive. By about third grade, you see a huge drop off. And I was discouraged by all the work that was going into trying to help these students just as a paraprofessional. And I left that job for a little while to take care of some things at home. And when I was looking again for a job, I was introduced to the Dyslexia Center of Utah. And at that time, I didn't know a lot about dyslexia. But as I went to interview for this job, I got out of my car and I went in to have my interview, and out popped this darling little girl that I'd had as a first grader 3 years previously. And she was walking into the Dyslexia Center. She was just, I know as an educator you really shouldn't have favorite students, but I loved this little girl. She was just a delight. And every day I would come home and think, what can I do to help her? She was so clever and so smart and could not make those letters go the right way in her mind. And I walked in and we walked in together and I said, well, hello, what are you doing here? And just as confident and as cute as can be, she just put her hands up and said, I'm dyslexic. And I said, of course you are. And immediately I understood that I could get those tools and that those students could be helped. Now I see her still, she has a different tutor, but I see her come in bright and shiny, on grade level, back in public school, happy, and still that same bright, darling little girl who now has that confidence in herself and has put those tools in her tool belt to read a little differently than the other kids do and still succeed. Cute.
Thank you. Leah?
So I work for a state agency that has state and federal funding. So any of our advocacy comes through the Department of Workforce Services and our team that does the advocacy on the Hill. So that's all how that outreach gets done. But of course, I can take any of my concerns up to my administrative team and let them know what's currently happening. I also work closely with the Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities. So they look at all the different things that are happening on the Hill. They actually put out reports during the session on what bills are out there and what's happening with those bills, and whether they're supporting or opposing those bills. So I think that's a great network to get in contact with if you want to know more about how to provide advocacy and how to make sure that the legislature is looking at disability as they move forward. How I got into this career, honestly fell into it. I didn't know that vocational rehabilitation was a career that you could go into and get a degree to help people with disabilities to become employed. Actually started out as a recreational therapist, Liz. I didn't know that we have something in common, and was working with individuals with disabilities from from before I graduated from school. My mom worked in a classroom of individuals with severe intellectual disabilities and volunteered in her classroom, and I just fell in love with the population, and I realized that there was not a lot of support for individuals. I did work for a time assisting individuals in their daily living activities in residential kind of settings, and then found the opportunity with Choose to Work, which is a partnership program that was through the Department of Workforce Services and Voc Rehab to help individuals connect to employment and connect to business partners. And then from there, I developed an affinity to be able to talk to business about disability, and built relationships with businesses now that are helping us get youth and adults with disabilities employed.
Thank you.
Gigi's Playhouse, we actually do a lot of our own lobbying. So prior to this year, we had received some state money, and this year we actually had Senator Haney, who represented us. We presented to a committee, and then as the legislature closed this year, they have given us quite a bit of money for a one-time donation, which is awesome. It will help with our build out as well as keeping our programs going and starting new programs more for our adults. The way I got involved in this is I have a little boy who is named Lincoln, and he is 5 years old now and has Down syndrome. When he was 8 days old, someone from the lab called and asked me if I was who I was, and I said yes, and she said, "I'm just calling to let you know Lincoln Hancock has trisomy 21, have a great day," and hung up. And I went, okay, is that the same as Down syndrome? I was really confused at that point. And then we proceeded to go on and didn't hear from anyone. No one had really reached out to us. I did quite a bit of research, and there wasn't a whole lot there was no brick or mortar building that we could go to that would help us with Down syndrome. Our Down syndrome clinic that was in Salt Lake it had closed 4 or 5 years prior. So we decided just to treat him normal and keep going. And we, when he was 18 months old, we heard of a special needs music class that was offered through early intervention. And I called to get him into that class, and she was excited and told me all about it. And then she asked me his name, and I said Lincoln Hancock, and she said he can't have that spot. And I was once again a little dumbfounded on the phone, and I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "He's way too far advanced than a lot of my preschoolers who need that spot." And I said, that's discrimination within our own community. And she said, "Well, you can call it what you want, but he can't have that spot, and have a good day." So as you can imagine, I hung up the phone not very happy at all. And 2 days later, I saw Nancy and Gigi on the Good Morning America show. And we got in contact with corporate and proceeded to open a Playhouse in the next 11 months. So that's how I decided to do it. You just got to tick me off, and I get a lot done.
You go, Mom.
Right.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think we have this still. Okay.
Yeah. I will make it quick. We do not have a specific department or staff member who lobbies, but we are in on a few different coalitions, a few different opportunities. We are involved with, for example, the Utah Office of Tourism and doing different things and initiatives for inclusive recreation access. The focus for this organization is on recreation, so education is not always at the top of our list. However, we believe very strongly that recreation is very important to supporting an educational goal for an individual, especially for individuals with intellectual or cognitive disabilities. We know that movement helps learning, and so supporting different initiatives, even coming down here as a staff team to support those movements, is something that we do, if it is part of their belief. But for me, I came into it because within school, I was going to the University of Utah, go Utes, and I was on a career path that I was told would make me very, very happy. And I started recognizing individuals around me that were thinking and moving and living differently than myself, and how much value that brought to me and to my world, and that I wanted to surround myself with people who think and move and live differently than myself. So I made it a quick career change.
Thank you. Pam, please.
Thanks. I have an uncle with Down syndrome, a brother with autism, and a 16-year-old son with autism. So this is all very close to my heart. And I love what Christine said about all the potential that is unlocked when learning is done the right way. I wanted to ask Leah from a very, this is a selfish question. The events you mentioned about connecting youths with disabilities with businesses, how do I get connection with those?
You can reach out to me. My email is my full name, Leah Lobato, with the L-O-B as in Bravo, ATO, @utah.gov, and I'll make sure that you get on the list to get emails when we do those events. Typically, they happen January to April, just because of the way the school year lands, and if we get too late in the year, testing's happening and whatever else. I'm assuming we'll have at least 7 events next year, and they will happen wherever we can get a business to host them across the state. So this last year, we had Weber State, Davis Technical College, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Verisys in South Jordan, doTERRA, and Clyde companies. So we had a broad different range of businesses, so students can kind of say, well, maybe I want to see this business or that business, and we open up the doors to any youth who has a 504 plan or an IEP. So we're excited to have any student attend and participate. One thing I like to make sure that parents and educators are aware of is that it doesn't necessarily mean that that youth is going to work at Goldman Sachs, because maybe that is not exactly where their career goal is or what their ability might be, but the opportunity to go to a business, to go into the 222 tower downtown and go to the 14th floor and see what it looks like and talk to their employees and hear from a panel of their young team members that talk about, when I transitioned from high school to college, it was like this and this. I didn't expect that. And one of their panel participants, she talked about, I hated math. I hated math in school, and I would have never thought I was going to be working in a financial firm, but this is where I am, and I love it. And they talk about transitioning from home to college, and it's just a conversation. It's not necessarily saying you're going to work at Goldman Sachs, but it's a conversation. So connect with me, and we'll make sure that you get on the list to get notified of those events. We do reach out to the schools, but sometimes the teachers are not passing that information on to parents.
Yeah, I think it was. Thank
Yeah.
you. And I have another question for Tricia. My son went to the Carmen Pingree Center for Autism for several years, and I was just wondering if you could compare the two.
Oh, that's a great question. There are different styles of applied behavior analysis, and our style is more based around the child's motivation, and so using what they're motivated by to learn, whereas there's other style, we use whatever style will work best for the kid. We've just found that our students work best using this PRT model. The model that they typically use at the Carmen Pingree Center is a model called Discrete trial training, and that is a more, they're running trials consistently, usually at a table or things like that. That can be really effective for some individuals on the spectrum. But we focus our treatment mostly around the child's interests and kind of follow their lead, and slip in programming as we see it's appropriate based on their motivation versus, a model that's more, I would say a little bit more cookie cutter as far as the programming is concerned. Still both really effective models, but ours is just a little bit different in that way.
Thank you. Any other audience questions? Yes.
So I'm currently going to school to be a junior high or high school shop teacher, and one thing I want to do is have a class specifically for special needs students. Like, I think a lot of students may just be told, oh, that's something that's not accessible to you, and then be excluded from that. And I want to make those activities still accessible, but adapted. So I'm just wondering how feasible that is. Like, would there be red tape surrounding it, or does it have to do with the administration cooperating with you, or like, would I have to get an extra certification, or just whatever's involved in the process?
So I'd like to invite you to come out to the Division of Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They have a wood shop, and we do our employer workshop every 6 months. So every March and September, we do a workshop for business partners to learn more about recruiting, hiring, and retaining individuals with disabilities. And the highlight of that training is we toured the center, Division of Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and they have a wood shop. When we take our business partners in, the lights are off, but the drills are going, the table saws, all of the stuff is going, and there's individuals in there with full blinders on in case they have any residual sight who are making inlaid chess sets and cutting boards and canoes and guitars. And we talk about accommodation. With the right accommodation, if the individual has the skill and ability to do that, there's no reason they can't do that activity. It's a matter of finding the accommodation that works and helping the individual reach their full potential. Now, I don't know what red tape you'd run into in schools, but they do need to make education accessible. And if an individual with a disability wants to take a shop class, there's no reason that we would want them to not get that experience.
Thank you.
I would tell you, if you are going to be a teacher, that if you would propose it to your principal, and it sounds funny, but I would interview principals before you took a job, because if you are wanting a job that you obviously want to make your classroom accessible to individuals with disabilities, then you need a principal who's on board with you. And there's quite a few of them that are. There's a few that aren't. But depending on what district you're in, there's really not anything extra you have to do, but you just, like I said, find a principal who backs that up and is willing to do that for you, and then you just need to ask for aids and services, because a lot of districts have the money for them, but what we run into is there's not teachers asking. So if you can ask for the aids and propose what you want to a principal who's willing to stand behind you, then it's very doable.
I have one concern. I really applaud you for wanting to do that. That sounds wonderful and amazing. Sometimes we run into the difficulty of bundling all the students' special needs, and we bundle them all together, when really their needs are so various and can be night and day different from one another, that a visually impaired student and a dyslexic student, that wouldn't really fit in the same classroom. Might not fit in the same classroom with a Down syndrome child. So what you might want to think about is ways to include those students in the mainstream classroom. And I like what Brittany said about finding aides, finding people that are able to do that, freeing up some of that money, perhaps to allow those students to participate fully without being relegated into the special needs group. That can be very challenging. I find that a lot with my dyslexic students, is that they get sent off to resource where maybe they are with students that are more intellectually disabled, and then these students lose that intellectual conversation and they don't have that same motivation. They aren't with their intellectual peers. They're with their reading peers, but not with their intellectual peers, and so that can be kind of stifling for them too.
I would stress that you would want to do as much integration as possible, mainstreaming and not having separate or segregated classrooms. Honestly, it's going to benefit all the students to be in a classroom where diversity is happening around them, where they're seeing other individuals with different, unique styles of doing particular tasks and thinking, well, hey, maybe that's a way for me to do it as well. So I would also say you try and do as much integration and mainstream as possible.
I also want to add, I applaud you as well, and I think your compassion and passion and dedication to the special needs population is just amazing. And I think really it's going to take individuals like yourself who are making changes from the inside, because we are all of organizations that come from the outside, and we can advocate all day long, but you knowing what you want and having the compassion that you do for these individuals is going to be really monumental inside the school system. And the more that you can advocate and get to know these guys on an individual basis, the more you'll be able to make change internally in the school system. So
You're here.
Congratulations.
I would also, I'm sorry.
No, please. Go for it.
I would also add, while you are in school, while you have the resources, start pulling some of the research that shows that individuals who go through vocational specific classes, shop classes, right, through school, if they have a different ability, are more likely to find employment and maintain employment through life than those who do not. The research is there, and I would be happy to share what I have. When you are approaching an administrator, whether they are supportive or not, if you have the research that shows it, as well as parent support, a community support, then you come a little bit more prepared overall, and it's harder to say no to a community than it is to a single person.
One more thing that I would add is, sorry, I would really get in with functional skills teachers as well as resource teachers, because those are the teachers that fight for that inclusion. And if they know that there is a typical teacher who is willing to allow their student to come in and be the best they can, then that's going to be way easier having them on your side as well.
Thank you. So I have been so impressed, and I've learned so much. I've been taking notes the whole time over here. And you probably realize this, but you're each champions of or spokespeople for thousands of people. And I know there are a lot of people here who are going to be writing articles and things like that. So if you could give us some sort of, short 30 seconds, what do you want people or parents to know about the communities that you work with as we wrap up? So let's start with Christine.
I didn't coin this phrase tonight, but I love it, was to assume competence. That these students have so many abilities that if we can tap into those things, we will all benefit from their amazing talents. It sounds selfish to say that, but it will benefit our society as a whole if we are able to access those competencies.
Thank you. Leah?
So in any of the work that I do with parents, I always talk to parents about having their children with disabilities treated the same way as their other children. So I think that that's a great thing that Brittany has said. Having them do chores, having them do activities in the house, having them participate in the household just as any other child would participate. And the main reason I say that is because then you get to look at what are the transferable skills that your child has. So does your child do a great job of tearing things apart? And people are saying, oh, they're never gonna work. Well, maybe they're gonna work at a recycling center and they're gonna tear apart electronics. And that will be a great career for them. So those transferable skills and getting kids to do things with the family and act as any other child is what I would recommend.
We have a thing that's called Generation G, and that is to be kind, be generous, and see ability. And that is something that I have really tried to push in our community, and especially to parents as well, is see past your child's disability, see what they're able to do, and see what they offer to your family as well as the community. And like I've said before, and she just said, I would, if I could say anything, is if you want your child to be included and you want inclusion across the board, is include them. So have the same expectations that you have for all of your other children or neighbor children, as well as for your child with a disability, because most of the time they can reach those expectations. It just might take a little bit longer.
Thank you.
I would say that through the National Ability Center, we believe that we can build an adaptive nation, and that is not an adaptive nation full of individuals with different disabilities, but different abilities. That to have an adaptation might be the way I have to adapt the way that I look at a situation. And similarly to what Brittany and Leah have said, kind of what we're all saying, to assume competence, but to also ask others to, or force others to do the same, to assume competence. It's not, when we go into a school system, it's not the end. We can always ask for support. We can keep asking. We have advocates that are there to support us through the IEP process, and all you have to do is ask. You never know what doors might be open.
Can I add one thing really quickly?
Sure.
Just before you go to the last thing. Disability is the only minority group that any of us can enter at any time. So making sure that our community is accessible and that employment is accessible only benefits all of us. Because as we age, we all know things happen. So next person.
That's a great point. Yeah, thank you. And Tricia, we'll end with you.
Yeah. So my thing is, as we look at our children with autism that we work with, they're different, but yet all of us are different as well. I would invite the community to get to know someone with autism, and by get to know, I mean really get to know. If they're nonverbal, you can ask their parents, you can talk to people around them, but as we get to know them and really be a friend, we can all benefit from our associations with this population. It isn't about us helping them, it's really about what we can all learn and gain and grow from getting to know anyone with special needs. But as we adapt to those needs and get to know them, I think our lives will be enriched as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of the panelists here and everything that you've shared with us. Thank you to the audience members. Thank you to those online, and let's give them a round of applause.